The 1990s was a pretty cool time for superbike technology. Now, if you think about the bikes that came out in that era, you had Kawasaki ZXR 750, you had YZF 750 Yamaha, Suzuki GSXR 750. Now, all those bikes were, the kind of bikes that you could buy. These had heroes riding them, but for me, there were two bikes that came out of the 90s that really stand out. Now, growing up as a kid in the 90s, I had a poster of both of these bikes on my wall. One was the Ducati 916, but the second was a bike ridden by a guy called Aaron Slight, New Zealand Aaron Slight. Now, it was the Castrol Honda. Now, if you actually watch some of those old races back in the day, you'll see Castrol Honda mounted Aaron Slight versus Ducati mounted Carl Fogarty. Now, these battles have gone down in history as some of the best on two wheels. And the Ducati 916, for example, was a gorgeous bike, an amazing bike, but it wasn't my favourite. My favourite was the Castrol Honda RC45. Now, to be able to get the chance to ride one of these things is extremely rare. There are only 200 of these bikes ever made, the production bikes that were ever made. 50 of them made them to the States, and here's one of them. Isn't that the most 90s looking motorcycle you've ever seen? Like, have a look at the headlights on this thing, your big bug round headlights, and the whole front of this bike is so huge that if you put this next to a current model CBR 1000, the CBR 1000 will look like a 600 in comparison to this thing. Compared to something like the GSXR, it was actually a fair bit heavier than GSXR, which was one of its problems. Now, the RC45 had a whole bunch of things that came with it. It was one of the very first motorcycles that Honda released that had fuel injection, PGM fuel injection. Now that system came off the NR 750, which is regarded by many as one of the absolute masterstrokes of Honda engineering. The RC45 was developed to replace the RC30, but it wasn't actually that closely linked to it. Funnily enough, it was more closely linked to the RVF 750, which was the endurance racer back in the day. It won the Suzuka 8 Hours with Wayne Gardner and Darrell Beatty and Mick Doohan, for example. The RVF 750 is one of an amazing motorcycle that's in Honda's history, and hence the RVF down the side here for the RVF 750 moniker. It was still obviously badged the RC45, but they kind of go by both names. V4 749cc gear-driven cams. Now, this engine had the cam drive moved from the centre of the engine to the right-hand side, runs off the crankshaft on this. It's one of the great shames in motorcycling that the RC45 is almost seen as the bad second album, I guess you'd call it. The first album, if you like, being the RC30. That was the banger. That was the one everybody remembers, and it's Honda's own fault, unfortunately, that the RC45 is seen in such a light, because you couldn't buy one. I mean, well, you could if you had a lot of money, but you also had to be able to make the things go. Now, in racing terms, you got to have power. Everyone knows you got to have horsepower. This model came out, this is the American model, this model came out with 100 horsepower, 101 to be exact. The European model came out with 118 horsepower. Now, when you consider that you're going up against 120 horsepower, 125 horsepower from a standard GSXR straight off the bat that cost way less than one of these things ever did, you're really up against it. On the flip side of the coin, it made the exclusivity of this bike, it really made it a very desirable thing. And nowadays, these things are worth almost more than what they were when they came out in 1994. If you're really lucky and you're getting on the web and looking for these things, you can find them in pockets where you can actually find the HRC kit that these things came out with for superbike racing. I mean, that will cost you back even more. You could be looking at well over 50k for one of these things. And look, this bike was the RC213 VS of its day. It has a direct lineage to that bike. These V4 Hondas started in the early 80s. These were the soundtrack of superbike racing in the 1990s. And even though Aaron Slight never managed to win the World Superbike Championship on it, John Kaczynski did in 1997 before he cleared back off to 500 GPs. Colin Edwards won his first races on this bike. yeah, it won Isle of Man TTs like it was easy. Won the Macau Grand Prix, won the Daytona 200 with Miguel Duhamel, won the American Superbike Championship with Miguel Duhamel, and the American Superbike Championship in 1998 with Ben Bostrom. It also won 2 Australian Superbike Championships in the hands of the crazy Anthony Gobert and the late Kirk McCarthy. Colin Edwards told me the other day that when these things were fitted with the HRC kit, they were the best bikes out there. You know, sorted RC45 was the best bike, but I don't know about you, I wouldn't mind going for a ride. You want to come with? Let's go. So I thought I would spare you traffic, Los Angeles traffic, because suffice to say the RC45 really isn't a lot of fun in traffic. I mean, it's a lovely bike, but it's like any other major sport bike, you know. It doesn't really love being stuck in traffic. It gets all hot and bothered. Well, that smooth power that this motor has, this V4 749cc motor, it's quite a welcome addition in traffic. But this, ladies and gentlemen, this area is where this motorcycle shines. So this is GMR, Glendora Mountain Road, just east of LA, well, still in LA, but just east of it. But this is the kind of stuff that the RC45 thrives in. Now, the things that I thought about when I was on the road about how easily it changes direction, it shows so much here. I mean, this thing you just look where you want to go and this thing will turn. And it's quite funny considering you got your 16-inch front wheel as well, and like it feels totally fine to me. I mean, it does have a slightly odd feeling. It actually turns like super quick, like just falls into a corner. I don't have any issue with it myself. I mean, it's got Bridgestone S20 rubber on there, so it's still quite good rubber. But you can just hear, like, I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but the whirring of the engine of this thing, like those gear-driven cams, they are such a Honda invention. Like other guys have had them, but they are an absolute trademark of Honda superbikes. Especially when you're talking about 80s and 90s kind of stuff, and it just has this glorious rumble, like this beautiful sound to it that it's just completely unlike any other V4 that has been made. So maybe not before, but definitely since. Today's V4s are very much a gruff and rough kind of horrible sort of, well, not horrible, they're very nice, but this one is a bit more sophisticated almost. It's a real drony kind of a sound. Beautiful sound to be able to listen to when you're riding. Got conventional 4-piston brakes, conventional master cylinder also. This is back before the days of a radial master cylinder, like a Brembo style master cylinder that was available to the general public. And look, brakes are pretty good. You still get, look, they're not outstanding, but you got to bear in mind this is a 25-year-old bike, a very nice example of a 25-year-old bike. But yeah, the front brakes, leave a little to be desired, I guess, over time. But look, for their age, they're very good. You have 41mm forks on this thing, so these things are not terribly big forks. But they seem to track alright. They have very nice sort of bump absorption. It's quite a soft ride at the moment. Like this is standard suspension settings for such an old motorcycle, so it's not like they're you're not setting this thing up to go track riding or anything like that. So those in the day who own these things certainly could, but either way, the motor for the PGM-FI programmable fuel injection system that was first debuted on the Honda NR750, which is just
unobtainable, even more so than an RC45. You know, I mean, the throttle's a little bit jerky, but it's not bad. It's you know, it's quite fine. Once you get the thing open, the throttle response is really nice. It's just from like close. There you go. Hang on. Duh. You can hear that like that full on-off kind of feel. You know, just a product of fuel injection systems all over, really. Certainly considering that this was Honda's first go at a proper production fuel injection system. NR was a production bike, but you know, no one's got one. Yeah, and again, 25-year-old technology. It still comes out quite good. The throttle response isn't bad at all. Certainly not as nice as a set of flat slide carbs or anything like that. But you know, this is back in the days when they were just still figuring this thing out. One of the things that's very apparent with this bike is the agility. Like, it just cracks from side to side so nicely, and it holds lines beautifully. It's a really sweet little bike. However, that's I suppose that's the golden word out of all this is little. You know, this thing is really small. You know, you need legs that are half the size of mine, half as long as mine, to really maximize this motorcycle. Like the reach to the bars is really long. You know, the controls are quite nice, although they're really sort of close together. Yeah, modern bikes, modern CBRs, G6Rs, and that kind of stuff have a bit of a wider bar set, a bit more like a motocross, you know, naked bike kind of a stance. Allows you to muscle these things around. These things were really based off 1980s ergonomics, which was, you know, smaller, lighter, faster, with the emphasis on smaller. You know, a MotoGP bike nowadays is a different kettle of fish. I mean, that's always, you need those things to be smaller, but even when you look at those bikes, those things are still quite big. They're very tall, but skinny, whereas this thing is short and stubby and fat. Try and negotiate all this sort of stuff, but yeah, it has a real stumpy kind of a feel to it. But you sit a little bit further back on this thing, you know, compared to something like an RC30. You're right over the front. The RC45 has a bit more of a relaxed sort of a feel to it, I guess. But yeah, you almost have to be Danny Pedrosa size to be able to really be comfortable in something like this. One of the most obvious things with the RC45 is just how long that first gear is. You know, just scooting from corner to corner, I'm still in first gear. It's astounding how long that gear is. Like, you really don't have to shift at all. You know, you get a 6, 7, 8,000 RPM is right in its sweet spot, and it really doesn't have much go below that. So there's almost no need to change gears. GMR Glendora Mountain Road, it's not the fastest of roads out there. When you bought these bikes back in the day, if you wanted to go racing with them, you know, your HRC would sell you, you know, a power-up kit or a works kit or whatever you want to call it. And that came with a whole bunch of things. Came with a 17-inch front wheel, so it allowed you to fit decent tyres, slick tyres predominantly. Also allowed you to put on bigger forks. It gave you various engine mods as well, intake mods, things like that. Different shock, although that shock was obviously easy enough to get from various aftermarket suppliers. So these were kind of like stage one. These road bikes. These were the base of what you could do. Compared to something like a modern day CBR 1000, yeah, CBR 1000 RRSP or SP2 or whatever it is that you're riding, that thing's capable of winning superstock races pretty much straight out of the bat. Whereas these things, you really had to make these things, you had to throw some coin at these things to make them go. I suppose that's what made them so exclusive. You had 200 motorcycles made by Honda, these RC45s, and only for 1994. So, you know, you're talking about some seriously exclusive stuff here. Yeah, the RC45 was the everyday man's factory superbike. This was the factory superbike. you know, this bike had a stellar year in 1994. Won I think 2 or 3 TTs in the hands of Steve Hislop and Joey Dunlop, and I think Philip McCallan won them. You also had in 1995, you know, Miguel Duhamel winning the Daytona 200. 1994, the infamous Anthony Gobert took the 94 Australian Superbike Championship, and Kirk McCarthy took the 95 Australian Superbike Championship, beating a certain Matt Mladen on both occasions. You know, Ben Bostrom won the 98 AMA Superbike Championship. It had numerous Suzuka 8-hour wins. Now this was an incredibly successful bike, but it was built for one thing. It was built to race in the World Superbike Championship with John Kaczynski was the one that finally won the title. You know, poor old Laren Slight, he's kind of the Randy Mamela, I guess, of World Superbike. You know, second, I think 2 or 3 times on the RC. You know, here's some of the rides that he put in were just nothing short of heroic on this bike. I mean, that for me, Slighty is the RC45 rider. I mean, every time I think of RC45, I think of the crazy New Zealander with the wild hair. You know, I liked that guy so much when I was in school. I actually got my hair cut like him, and you know, a complete fanboy of him because he used to have these wild haircuts. The title was finally delivered in 1997 in the hands of John Kaczynski, and once that was done, development was kaput. That was it. Because in 2000, you know, I mean, in 98, John left and went to 500s, and Colin Edwards took his place. Rode it for 2 years, but in 2000, Honda finally mothballed the RC45 and brought out the VTR 1000 SP, or SP1, I think it was, also known as the RC51, which the late great Nicky Hayden won the 2002 American Superbike Championship, beating once again Matthew Mladen. So it's funny how it all kind of ties in, and how, you know, the story of this bike sort of works for Honda, and the history that it's had. You never ever see these bikes on the road. They don't exist. I mean, I can think of the time where I've seen one of them, and that's it. You know, so you don't get the chance to ride these things, and I don't think anyone's tested an RC45 for such a long time. I mean, you don't even see them in classic racing anymore. If you're very, very lucky, you might be able to get your hands on a privateer bike or something like that. But I mean, you got to be really, really lucky. There's actually a guy in the UK who got Alex Barros's RC45 from the 98 or 99 Suzuka 8 hours, a Lucky Strike bike. I mean, those things, I mean, God knows what he did to get that bike. That's like winning the lottery. It's a really, really special bike. I mean, even though it's got a few shortcomings, you know, it certainly doesn't feel very fast, although that was something that could be fixed. It was very, very expensive for its day. You know, you needed the bits and pieces to hot them up to make them go, but there's no doubting that this bike is, it's a special bike. You know, this is a rarity to be able to get the chance to ride one of these things, and I have to thank John Seidel from Honda for giving me the keys to one of my dream bikes. I had one of these things on my wall as a poster. I never ever thought I'd get the chance to ride one, so to be able to give these things a crack is pretty special. And everything about it is so 90s. I mean, you look at the clocks, the switch gear, and these big tubes, you know, intake tubes. I mean, that is 90s and 80s to a T. But still, like, just an excellent bike. Really, really pleasing to have a ride on this thing. What a cool bike.
Well, I hope that's kind of given you an idea of what this thing is like to ride. It's a very short ride. I mean, you don't get to keep these bikes for very long. We've only got it for a couple of hours, so it's just a bit of a teaser, I guess, as to what these things are really like. I mean, for me to actually take this thing for a ride, this is an absolute tick of the bucket list thing for me. You know, there's only one other Honda really which I'm dying to have a ride on, which I will never get the chance to ride, and that is an NSR 500. Those are long gone, but this is 50% of the childhood bikes that I've wanted to ride. It's one of those cases where, like, you don't want, I can't thrash this thing, so I can't really find out just how good it can be. But it's sort of, as good as this bike is, it really highlights how good modern bikes are. I mean, this was the top of the line stuff back in the mid 90s. This is as good as you could get. Nowadays, a modern 600 CBR would run rings around this thing, but I'll take this thing any day. I mean, there's such a presence about this bike. I mean, when you're riding this thing and you're listening to that exhaust and that intake through these giant things here, you know, that's not like, modern bikes don't do that. They don't have that kind of a sound to them. It's like an old Ferrari, you know, like an old V12 Ferrari has that really evil, rough, gruff kind of a sound. But this one's like it's a bit more sophisticated, you know, it's got that drone, that flat drone that was just made so famous by Aaron Slight, Carl Fogarty, Joey Dunlop, you know, Anthony Gobert, you know, all these guys that won races and titles on the RC45. You know, that's what you think when you think the RC45. This is not a bike that you're just going to go down the road and buy. This is probably the cleanest example, this one in particular, is probably the cleanest example of a Honda RC45 anywhere in the world. You know, it's only got 4,000 miles on it. 4,000 miles, and it's a 1994 model. As I say, they only ever made 200 of these things, so there's 199 of these things else somewhere else. In fact, there's probably a lot less, seeing as a lot of them got turned into race bikes, got trashed. But yeah, this is kind of like stage one. This was the base model. If you wanted to make the thing go really fast, you needed to do other things. You know, you had to buy the HRC power-up kits and really work with HRC to make these things, you know, the be-all and end-all, I guess you'd say, as far as racing. But look, as a quick ride, I'm pretty blown away. Thanks very much to Honda for giving us this chance to ride this bike. I mean, there's not many people in the world, many companies in the world that will let you ride one of these bikes, and American Honda, thank you very much for letting me fulfill a bit of a childhood dream. I hope this has given you guys a bit of an idea of what this bike's like to ride. I'm gonna now take this back in some LA traffic and give it back to him just as I found him. But thanks very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please comment section below. It always helps. I'll do whatever I can to answer your comments on the RC45. You know, just keep your eyes out for more content coming from us from Cycle News. Cheers, guys. Thanks.